Reacting to Authortube writing advice videos, we're talking about common new writer mistakes or 13 writer mistakes to avoid by Meg Latour, aka iWriterly. So go ahead and smash that subscribe button, ring the bell, comment, like, and share this video. Do all the things to help this channel grow. You know you want to. Now let's get on with the show. Disclaimer before we begin. I'm reacting to popular writing advice here on YouTube. This is not an attack, so don't read too much into it. It's not that serious, it's not that deep, and it's all in good fun. Hopefully writers can learn a thing or two. If not, well, I tried. Please note that I sped up all clips to save up on time and cut out most of the intros, outros, and anything sponsor related. Also, this falls under fair use. If there is a writing advice video you'd like me to react to, then comment it below and I will help make that happen. And now it's time for some shameless self-promotion. If you haven't already heard, Year of the Author has officially launched its editing and critiquing services. I offer copy editing, line editing, developmental editing, proofreading, and critiques for full manuscripts, chapters, and outlines. For more information, please check out the About section on this channel or email me at yearoftheauthor@gmail.com. Now let's get on with the show.
Writing a story idea or trope that's stale or has been done many times before. When I think of trope, I think of like scenarios that are often done in certain genres. So fantasy genre, the chosen one. In adult romance, it's the billionaire romance where the woman falls in love with the billionaire man usually. In fantasy, elemental magic was big for a while. Fae were big for a while. Vampires had their heyday a bunch of years ago.
Fae were big for a while? I feel like this is still going on. Am I wrong? Am I wrong about this? I feel like this is still going on.
Rumor has it they're coming back, but at the time, maybe mid-2000s, a vampire trope was a vampire falling in love with a high school student. Magical boarding schools are very popular courtesy.
And isn't that gross? Some 1,000-year-old vampire, some 200-year-old vampire. Disgusting. Do I have an age gap? Yes. Does it make more sense? Yes. Is it less gross? I think so. You tell me.
Of Harry Potter. Newbie writers often write stories with tropes that are overdone because they usually are reading older books. They're not actively reading, usually, the books that are coming out this year, 2 years ago, 5 years ago. You know, they might be reading the books that came out in the 2000s or maybe the 90s. And so these tropes that are stale, they've been done many times before, and agents and editors and readers don't really want to see. These new writers are still interested in them because, again, maybe they're reading a lot of older books and they're like, hey, I'll do a unique spin on that, when maybe it really wasn't all that unique.
Oh Lord, here we go again. So what Meg is saying here is true. An overused trope is still an overused trope, and trends come and go with every season. The problem here is this. Is this the story you want to tell? Are you writing to market? Or do you want to be completely and 100%, or try to be, original? What sets your story aside from all the rest that is involving that same plot or trope? Some new authors want to include an overused trope or trend chase, and if that's what they want to do, so be it. Go forth and do it. But here's my unwanted 2 cents thrown into the mix.
I do want it.
Try to add a unique twist to those overused tropes and cliches so it doesn't blend in with all the rest and your book is able to at least stand out just a little bit. If we're going to link this book back to the Cyborg Tinkerer, we could say that Meg used the quote-unquote Hunger Games trope, just like Jenna Moreci did with the Savior's Champion, with the death tournament and all of that. Is the death tournament trope an overused plot now? Pretty much.
Yeah.
But you know what? I am still trash for it. Hell fucking yeah. I love this trope.
I love tournaments. I've always loved tournaments since I was a kid. I used to watch wrestling, and one of my favorite pay-per-views was called King of the Ring. And what they would do is, in the weeks leading up to the pay-per-view, they would have qualifiers, right? So I think you had to win 2 qualifiers in order to get onto the pay-per-view, right? So, what is that? 64 or 32? I'm not sure what it is. But whatever it is, it was like, 2 weeks worth of qualifiers, and then the actual pay-per-view had 8. So yeah, 16, 32. Yeah, so it'd be 32. So 32 people on week 1. Week 2 was 16 people. The night of, there'd be 8. and then they would have 3 matches to win, right? And I love the idea because of like the endurance factor, right? It was like you have to survive. I mean, obviously it's all fake. You have to survive 3 matches, right? In one night, you got to go through 3 matches, right? And I just love that idea. I thought it was so good to have that extra. That was kind of like the stipulation of the match is like you start off tired. That's the stipulation. It's not a steel chair match. It's not a ladder match. It's not a cage match. It's you start super faded. that's the stipulation. And I just thought it was so good. So I'm also trash for tournaments. Like the Super Death tournament though is not exactly, I mean, it hits, sure, but it's not exactly like my speed. My speed is more like you go through a number of people, one-on-one, or however many people are in it, everyone for themselves kind of thing. But you win, you're done, and you have to do it again. That's what really gets me is like, the whole, like the Hunger Games I did like because it was at that time a fresh take on the idea of a tournament. Like you won, you killed that guy, but now your downtime is surviving in the wilderness of a forest, right? That's your downtime, and you got to do it again because there's another guy over there you got to kill, right? I did like that, but I do see a lot of books come across my way where there's a tournament involved. I do notice, though, that it is a crutch. A lot of the times where I see people writing these tournament books, the writing is very poor. The writing is not there. Compared to other authors who might be in the exact same genre of like dystopian or fantasy romance or whatever. They're in the same genre, but they're just not doing that particular trope. And I think one of the reasons why it really helps, is because it forces the conflict. You're in a tournament. You don't have a choice. You will fight these other people and they will fight you, right? Now you're in this game for your life, right? So it forces the conflict onto the characters. And a lot of times too, like there's, the different reasons for going into the conflict can differ, or to go into the tournament, I should say, can differ. But a lot of times it does feel a little unnecessary, right? Like there was a reason in Hunger Games that they were doing it was because it would get, for the individual, it would get them out of having to live the life that they were living, right? They could, if they win the Hunger Game, they'll never be hungry again. They get all their needs met. But for the Capitol, they were doing it to impose their power on the populace, right? And that usually is what it is for most of the other things that I read, where it's basically just a overzealous dictatorship, and they're going to have a Hunger Games like storyline because we need them to fight each other. We need to show how cool our main character is, how badass they are. They can handle it. They've been training their whole life for it. Oh my god. So yeah. That being said, my book also has a tournament. It's in the very beginning though. It's not the main plot of the story, and it's just a normal tournament. It's like, a gladiator style. We go into the arena, we fight, one of us wins. Maybe you live, maybe you die kind of thing. And then we go to the next one. And then we go to the next one. And then we go to the next one kind of thing. So, yeah.
I'll always love this plot trope, I guess. It's maybe not just a trope. Maybe it's a plot trope. But I automatically get really interested in wanting to read a book centered around a death tournament. I think it's fun. There should be more books like it. But I can also see how if the market is just saturated with it,
more books like that if it's done right.
And I also have to say, I've been working on my own death tournament in the world of Breaking Eden, and it's the spin-off called Building Legends, or that's the working title. And I've been working on that for the last year or so. I took a very long break, but it's in the works. But hopefully, I'm bringing a true bloodbath to the table instead of a sprinkling of death and disparity. Because I love extreme horror and I love gore, and it's what I always write. Building Legends, like I said, is the working title, and it's a true fight to the death competition with only one winner, so there aren't any loopholes or weak plot twists that just let people out of the tournament. If you're entered into it, you either win or you die. That's the rule. The tagline that I'm currently working with is mystical, mechanical, deadly, and they fight to the bitter end. I'm a sucker for a fight to the death tournament, like I had already said. The bloodier, the better. The more depraved, the better. But if we're going to assume that Jenna Moreci hopped on the bandwagon with the Hunger Games trend, and Meglator followed suit, or just maybe hopped on Jenna Moreci's trending plot, we could say the Hunger Games copied Battle Royale, and that Battle Royale hopped on The Long Walk by Stephen King. My point is this: the death tournament plot has been done to death, but in each case scenario, the games are...
I was a little shocked when Guardio told me about 10 different information links with which I had associated accounts.
Different, and each one brings something unique to the table.
Up here.
That is why it's still interesting to read, because they're not all one and the same. There will always be trends coming and going, as well as tropes that readers love or hate. If you insist on doing a trend or a trope, the least you can do is make sure yours is actually taking a unique perspective, so you know it stands out from all the rest, or at least a little bit. Otherwise, you'll end up with something like the Cyborg Tinkerer, where it's a mashup of a whole bunch of shit that just doesn't really make any sense and doesn't mesh well. Or maybe it'll be like the Savior's Champion, where everything is watered down and not all that deep.
Which leads nicely.
Shots fired. Okay, one thing I want to say about this, though, is that the whole idea of like chasing the... Well, actually, I'll get into that here in a second. Let me just say it this way. If you read a book from 2019, if you read a book from 1990, Jesus Christ. If you read a book from the 90s or you read a book from the early 2000s and there's a trope in there that you like, it's probably been around since before the 90s, and it's probably going to stay around since forever on. Okay, it's not going to be a thing that it was just hot in the 90s, probably, is all it really comes down to. You could be the one who brings it back. Let's first off say the good things about this. First off, you should write what you want to write. If you see a trope that you like and you want to write about it, it sparks ideas in your mind, then do it. Okay, don't give a shit about what the trending things are. Okay, because here's the other side. If you try to chase what is a trend, first off, you have to kind of see what a trend is going to be, right? Because by the time that, like, you know, let's say that you're back in 2008 or 2010 or whenever it was that the Hunger Games came out, when you first saw the Hunger Games, you had to first off realize, okay, this shit is going to trend. Like, I need to get my book. I need to start writing a book now that this book is already out, right? Your book, let's say that you write it as fast as possible. Let's say that you write it, if NaNoWriMo happens, so you write your book in 1 month, okay? So 1 month after this other book's already out, now you just wrote your book. Now you got to query it, okay? Now you got to get it accepted. Now you got to wait for them to actually publish it, okay? You get to go through all the editorial phases, get it published. I got a book deal like a year and a half ago. I signed a year and a half ago, and I just now got an email back saying, hey, We sent it to our developmental editor, and we're going to continue on now. Great, thanks, right? Like, holy shit, it took 1.5 years to start the process of edits to get it published, right? The publisher was like, we love it, we want it, let's do it, but not now. Let's do it later when we can, right? Because they're so backed up. So if I had written that book off of like trending topics, then it'd be 1.5 years later already, and that topic, if I'm guessing, was a trending topic. If I was like making the prediction that this topic would trend, I might be wrong, and then now I've got this story that's not trending. That I don't have a trending trope or whatever going on. So therefore, I took a shot and it missed, right? Or it was already trending at that time. So I realized, oh, look, there's like 3 or 4 books out right now that are trending with this genre topic or this genre trope. And now I'm going to do it, right? And again, let's say that you do it in a month, which is unlikely, but let's say that you do it. Then it takes 1.5 years for your publisher to start the process of developmental edits. It's going to take several months for that to actually go through. So you're really not even going to be published for like 2 years after the trope was on fire. So why trope chase? Why go for these trending chases? It doesn't make any sense. You could either try one that's like super early and be wrong, or you could try one that has been around for a while and then take forever to then jump on that bandwagon. Just do what is actually fun. Like whatever it is that you actually want to do, whatever it is that you feel comfortable doing, do those. Because again, if the trope was back in the 90s, it's probably been around since before the 90s. But even still, if you haven't seen that trope in a while, maybe you're the one who launches into that trope's like fire phase for the 2020s, for the 2030s, right? Maybe that's you. You're the first one to hit it, right? And then, the Gen A people, Gen Alpha, is like, he's a genius. I've never read anything like this before. It was amazing. And it's like, oh, wow. You should read books from the 90s, kid. So I wholeheartly disagree with the idea of any trope being like out of style, out of fashion. They're all been used to death. They've all been used to death, right? Good luck making up a trope. Good luck. You're what? According to just generic numbers, we're at least like 7,000 years into recorded human history. You think that your trope hasn't shown up in 7,000 years?
Number 2, writing a trope, but not in a unique way. So again, this is the chosen one, going on a heist, a love triangle, a quest. These are tropes that have been done before, but if you do them in a way that's exactly identical to books that are on the market, or more likely popular books that are on the market, you're going to earn a swift rejection.
Well, I basically covered this in the last point. I don't know why this topic is getting its own point right now. I guess I can point out a positive in Meg's book, The Cyborg Tinkerer. I know, it's shocking. It's shocking because I DNF'd the book twice. And that is the poly love triangle. Oh, Meg tried and got a gold star for flipping the whole love triangle trope on its head, but sadly, the polyamory relationship is now quickly becoming the way to explain away the dreaded love triangle trope, and I absolutely fucking hate it, because I really, really dislike love triangles. And sadly, in one of my books, I have a love triangle trope, arrows. And I'm keeping it in there because that's what's popular, and it kills me every time I think about it. And the reason why I don't like poly being the explanation to explain away the love triangle is mainly because I have the theme of polyamory in my book, Breaking Eden, and I don't want it watered down to being just another fucking trope that doesn't matter. I've been working on Breaking Eden for too damn long at this point to allow that to happen. But the difference between Meg's book and mine is that after the threesome happens in Meg's book, it doesn't actually feel like Bastian wants any of it at all. He's not interested in Rora. Rora is standing in the corner just watching Gwen and Bastian go at it, and then she's called over like a lonely little puppy to join. It's very awkward and weird, and there's like 7 pages of consent talk, and yeah, it's just weird. Which I also kind of see as problematic, because if you're trying to represent polyamory in a positive light, that's not the way to do it. All parties need to be consenting and fully want that sort of relationship. You can't have someone who's 1 foot in and 1 foot out, because at the end of the day, that's what will destroy their relationship. Meg also played into the trope of the slutty bisexual character, which isn't necessarily bad. It doesn't offend me. But it's still a trope nonetheless. I mean, Gwen was fucking everyone and everything that walked or rolled past her. But I wonder if this is one of the reasons why Meg's book didn't get picked up by an agent. I guess we'll never know, because Meg Latour disappeared from YouTube and all of social media.
Really? She did? I think I heard that she took a break. I didn't know that she actually disappeared completely. As far as this goes, where she's talking about, what was it? I kind of don't even remember what this topic was. Basically, actually, let's just go back and see what it was, because I already forgot.
Which leads nicely to number 2, writing a trope, but not in a...
writing a trope, but not in a unique way. Okay, so as far as that goes, when it comes to writing a trope, you're going to be writing a trope in a unique way no matter what, because you're the one doing it. I'm muted. I've been muted. The chosen one trope, right? My question is basically how do people write it, the same when you have different scenarios already going on, right? If it's like, you've got different characters, you've got different settings, you've got different world, you've got different circumstances. How is it that you write the exact same? You don't really. You wrote it, and it's going to be different. It's going to be different. At the same time, it's going to be the same because it's still the chosen one trope, right? Sure, you could, you basically, it's just how you dress it up, So if you read it like Harry Potter's chosen one is, he got chosen by there was the prediction that some child would be born, and it could have actually been him or Neville, and it depended on how kind of it went through, and then Voldemort went after him, and it ended up being Harry, right? So there was some sort of it could have been either one of them. It turned out to be Harry. The whole chosen one thing, the reason that he was good enough to be able to kind of beat Voldemort was because of the fact that Voldemort, broke his soul, became in the fucking Horcrux thing, and so all that. The prophecy basically became a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? It was dressed up in that way. If you do the exact same thing, that takes a lot of you forcing that. It takes a lot of you really going like a checklist, right? I have to checklist this by going, okay, I need to make a prophecy, and the prophecy I need to make it to where it could be our main character, or it could be a different character that we'll meet later on. And it turns out to be our main character because the villain goes to kill him, but then the mom uses a magic spell to protect him, and that makes the magic spell, the protection spell bounces back like the killing spell, and then the guy should die, but he doesn't because of other magics that are involved. But because of that, that imbues the main character as a baby with special magic powers that will make him really good later on when he's adult. And so that way he's actually very powerful because he's got like the most powerful wizard's soul or essence or whatever you want to call it in him. So there we go. That was a whole laundry list of checks that you have to go through to get to be just like Harry Potter's chosen one, right? As long as you don't do that, then you're fine. You're fine. You can do a chosen one. There's nothing wrong with doing a chosen one.
Point.
Number 3 is including too many line-level cliches. Okay, so let's clarify what tropes versus cliches are, and I might do a whole video on this topic in the future. So tropes are things like the chosen one. It's a scenario in a story that you can play out in a unique way. A cliche is more like line-level stuff. So the white knuckles on the steering wheel as a description to show that the writer is anxious or scared. Not the character is anxious. Or maybe your heart fluttering. It's really overdone descriptions. Line-level stuff that have been done to death, and they really don't evoke imagery in the minds of the reader anymore, again, because they've been done so many times.
Oh Lord, here we go again. At this point, I think we should have Gwen is dying on that list of line-level cliches. Or perhaps we can use Charlotte has brown curly hair from Natalia Lee's book Song of the Dryad. Or perhaps even further, we could add Olivia into the mix from the Ivies, because we're constantly reminded that Olivia is poor. And the Ivies was written by Alexa Dunn. Or how about how the characters in the Savior's Champions say cunt, cock, and apologies like it's going out of style, and they are a 10-year-old saying it for the first time. So of course it's in every other sentence they speak. Now, I admit those aren't actually line-level cliche sayings. They are just overused sayings in those particular books to the point where it's seen as way overused. But what Meg is saying here is pretty right. If your manuscript has too many cliche sayings, your reader is going to notice it, and you run the risk of them getting pulled out of the story each and every time, or it might piss them off enough to just completely DNF your book altogether or one-starring it. I've personally done it. It annoys me, but I can see why authors put it in there. And at the end of the day, authors have final say what's in their book, not readers. I personally think they shouldn't all be banned though, because common sayings are common for a reason. So, for example, in Meg's description of the gripping something so hard their knuckles are white, to me, as a writer and a reader, this
Welcome to my home, where your meat gets made.
No.
I'm here.
This paints a good picture in the reader's mind. The problem here lies in the amount that phrase appears on the page. If you have 5 common phrases per chapter and or keep using the same one over and over, it's going to get annoying, and you need to cut them out altogether or cut them down while self-editing. And here is my unwanted 2 cents in the mix. Use them if you must.
Before she gets into this, just use them as you must. Repetition is something that needs to be done like a brush stroke. It's an artistry flair. If you have repetition going on and you didn't mean to do it, it's probably going to stand out as ugly to the reader. If you meant to do it, if it's a literary device that you're using repetition, that is different, and that can be powerful. In fact, that can be very powerful to the reader. So when you're doing any kind of repetition, make sure that it's intentional. If you're reading through your manuscript on your edit and you see that you've repeated the same word or you've used the same phrase, and you didn't mean to do that, first off, check to just make sure that it doesn't sound good, because sometimes, rarely, sometimes your savant might be peeking out, and it might have done that for you on your behalf, and it might be really good. But other times, most times, it was a mistake and you should fix it.
But use them sparingly. A few sprinkled into the entire manuscript isn't bad, but a few sprinkled within every scene is. So don't oversaturate the book with them, or it could ruin an otherwise good story. Or at least that's my reader opinion here. It really feels like nails on the chalkboard, and I always get pulled out of the story. See what I did there? Nails on a chalkboard. On to the next one.
Number 4 is telling versus showing, and I swear I talk about this so much on my channel, but it is an issue that 80% of writers I talk to, they struggle with. Here are a few ways you can be accidentally telling versus showing. You can be telling how the character is feeling, relationships between characters, the weather, the setting. All these things can be done through showing, and a lot of times within the scene itself. You don't need to stop the dialogue or the scene to be like, this was fun, my name is very cold, and thus everyone wore cloaks. No, you can just describe your characters wearing cloaks, and therefore, this is fantasy, so therefore, the reader knows it's cold outside. Or maybe they kick off snow from their boots as they walk inside the inn. You know what the weather is like because you're seeing the character kicking off the boots. Meanwhile, we see how the character's acting. Are they respectful of their surroundings? We're learning a lot about the setting and the characters through showing.
This is a great example of Meg offering up some great advice, but kind of fails to take it herself. I think the reason why the bigger Authortube channels fail to listen to their own advice is that they never really talk about the gray areas and the exceptions to all the rules. They just basically assume they are the exception to all the rules when they aren't. Typically, these Authortubers offer up rules in an always or never situation, and it's, again, typically followed up with something like, if you don't do your book like this, it's going to suck. Or in Jenna Moressi's case, if you don't do it like I do it, you suck, and so does your book. Or at least that's the kind of attitude she gives off every single time. As for Meg, I think her example...
I will back up Jenna a little bit here. I mentioned this earlier in the stream that I think Jenna comes with a voice of authority because of the fact that you basically need that voice of authority sometimes. You need to come in and you need to sound assertive. This is what's going to happen. We're going to do it this way. And this way we get done. Okay, here we go. That helps people really commit, right? If you leave it wishy-washy, like, well, you could do it like this if you want to. I think you should do it like this. Doing it with plan A is much better. Plan B kind of sucks, but I mean, it works for some people, so it does work, but I really don't do plan B because plan A is the best way to go in my opinion. So you should probably do plan A, but you know, figure that out. People want to be told what to do. Okay? A lot of people want to be told what to do. There's a lot of people out there who want to think for themselves and they want to figure it all out. But so many people just want to be told, what's the answer? You know? So many times, we just want to know what the answer is. I don't care which version you think is better. I just want to know what to do. Just tell me. And if they hear this wishy-washy thing, it can make them go look for that voice of authority. It can make them leave and go look for the voice of authority. Having, Jenna do that kind of stuff where she's like, do it like this, here's like this, and do it like this. That just makes people so much more comfortable with doing it rather than kind of worrying like, well, I hope I'm one of the ones that it's good with. Just remove all the self-doubt. Just get it all out. If you do it like this, you'll be fine, right? And she's wrong. She's wrong sometimes, right? Because if a pantser follows her opinion, or her instructions, then they could end up doing the wrong thing, right? They could end up basically not writing the way that that their brain is really wired to write, okay? But they are still writing. They are still getting something done. And a lot of other people who are planners are going to gain a lot from Jenna. So I definitely get Kathrine when she says, like, that's the kind of feeling I get, like, if you don't, then you suck. But I think that it is I don't know if it's like 100% cognizant on Jenna's part, but I think Jenna is very smart. I think that I don't think anyone can argue that she knows how to market, right? That, being assertive, is a marketing strategy. coming across as the definitive voice, being the authority, right? Rather than being like, oh, I kind of want to just be like a nice, like, you know, you do you kind of person. No, I want to come across as the person who tells them how to get it done, and they will listen to me. They'll take my advice rather than anyone else's, which means that they keep coming back to my videos rather than anyone else's. That is a marketing strategy. She's a good marketer. She knows what she's doing.
Here are pretty decent. I think the main thing to remember here is to make sure there is an even amount of telling and showing. You don't need to show everything. That's just as bad as too much telling. My unwanted 2 cents on this situation is this. Look at the scene and ask yourself, which is needed more, showing or telling? Is the pace of the scene fast and you don't want to interrupt the flow of things? Then consider leaning more towards telling. But if you're laying down the description of a setting, go with showing the reader more than just saying something like, it's winter, or it's hotter than Satan's asshole outside. The best and easiest way to go about this would be to go back to the 5 senses. What is the character seeing, hearing, tasting, feeling, and smelling? But, and I caution you on this, please, for the love of God, do not overdo it, because that can bog down the narrative of the story, and readers may not like paragraphs upon paragraphs upon paragraphs, maybe.
And also don't use those exact words of seeing, smelling, tasting, touching. When we use those words, those are filtering words, and they suck, and we want to describe it rather than tell you that they're tasting something, right?
some even pages of detailed description when it isn't necessary. Number 5, flowery writing. This is a really big newbie writer mistake, and guys, I've done it myself. Now, I don't know if it's like all writers, we are flexing our writerly muscles and we kind of want to be like literary fiction, but we're writing genre fiction. I don't really know why it is, but so many writers, especially when I was a newer writer and I was critiquing my fellow writers' works, because again, it's so important to have critique partners and exchange and constantly improving our craft, but we all dump the sources into our writing and pretend like we're using these words properly, or that maybe readers would even know, understand what these words are. If you're writing middle grade fiction, you can't be using crazy vocabulary, you have to write to that audience. So, and this is nothing against literary fiction, and if you write literary fiction, you want to learn more about it, we are not the place to learn. We talk about genre.
Kathrine, please slow her way the fuck down. She sounds like a chipmunk, and she's talking so fast. I don't think you need to have her sped up as much as you have Jenna. Jenna talks a much slower cadence. Meg, that's her name. Meg talks way faster. You can slow her down, and it takes brain power to actually understand what she's saying.
Fiction on iWriterly. So if you're shoving too many adjectives and adverbs into your writing, or using too many big vocabulary words, you might be having an issue with flowery writing. Don't be dumping a thesaurus onto your manuscript, and definitely check out our video about filler words to remove from your novel. Okay, this is when I get to piss everyone off now. Now, I love me some poetic prose, I do, but dear God, do some authors sound pretentious as fuck in their writing. And it ruins the story for me every time. It shows from page 1 to the very end of the book, and it's just so fucking terrible. I'm talking really bad, to the point of it almost coming off like they know they suck at writing, but they keep on trying to just prove to the reader that they can write a book kind of bad. They have basic sentence structures and then throw in some rarely used words in today's world to just prove how intelligent they are and how big their vocabulary is.
I've seen this with even experienced writers, where I think that sometimes it's like they learned a new word and they want to use it, and yeah, it doesn't fit with like the rest of the narrative that they've been doing so far. Like, it's hard to quantify exactly, but at some point you do kind of fall into like a sphere of like your vocabulary, right? There's like the very basic sphere that everyone has. Then there's kind of this outer ring that's like, you know, that person paid attention in high school, okay? Then you have another outer ring where it's like that person paid attention in college. Another ring is like this person actually like learned words. They actually went through and like learned more words than normal. And then like this upper echelon where it's like, you know, all the words exist or something. And when you're reading a writer, you kind of just get this sense of like kind of where they are. And when you hear that other word, you're like, wait a minute, whoa, that's like 2 notches up, bro. Like you're making a jump here. That's not that ain't you, dude. You know. So yeah, I think it's important to very, very cautiously sprinkle in some higher level words, because I think that as authors we do have a little bit of a responsibility to improve the craft, right? We all want to improve the planet and leave the planet better than what we found it at, right? We all want to raise our kids better than how we were raised. So that goes for the same with writing. You want to leave writing better than what you found it at, right? So yeah, you do want to. I would love, because I had this experience when I was young and I read Lord of the Rings. I had to get up, go to the living room, pick up the dictionary, find what the word meant, and go, okay, that's what that word means. Went back to my room, kept reading. A couple pages later, gotta go back out there. And eventually I just took the dictionary back to my room, because I was like, I'm gonna need this, obviously, right? So I think that I would personally love to make it to where, you know, probably the kids, probably younger audiences would read my novel and go, I need a dictionary for some of these words. I don't know what they are. At the same time, I don't want it to be too hard. People who are smart enough to get context clues should be able to read my entire book and not have to pick up a dictionary. Might have to look up a word or two just to be sure. Like they have like the inkling, like, you know what? Given the way that it was like in the narration, it probably means this. I'm just gonna double check. Oh, it does mean that. Okay, I was right. Right. That's kind of where I'm really shooting for most general audiences, right? But I want to have that. I would love to have that where people learn a couple new words per book. But at the same time, you know, I have to be cognizant of when I do that. I have to be cognizant of how much higher that vocabulary word is compared to the rest of the vocabulary, that kind of thing, right? So yeah, be careful using the thesaurus and like picking out the most unique word possible, because most likely people don't know that. You probably didn't know it when you picked it out. You're like, oh, well, I've never seen such a word, but it means what I want it to mean, right? I looked up the word that I want to use, or that I did use, and I just looked at a thesaurus and there's that word, right? Usually when you get the advice to use a thesaurus, it's not to go find flashy versions of your word. It's to just find a different version of your word, so that way you're not repeating yourself over and over again. Okay? So, very few, just a couple flashy words throughout the book, probably you're going to be fine. But, you know, trying to be special and have the most unique prose possible is not a good idea.
It's very easy to spot, and I always get secondhand embarrassment whenever I see that. We get it, Jan. Your vocabulary is big. Now, if you could focus less on word choice and more on, you know, the plot of the fucking story and maybe better characterization, that'd be great. But my point is this. You can arrange and rearrange all the pretty fancy words all day, every day on the page. But writing does not stop at word choice. Trust me, I've read some beautifully written books, but that's all they are. Beautifully worded books. They lack everything else a book needs to thrive, in my opinion. And if you think pretty prose is the end-all be-all to writing books, then holy shit.
Sweaty Betty, find your power.
Antivirus does not protect your credit card info. Guardio does. Even if your computer's
shit, I never want to read your book because it's probably a burning dumpster fire of purple prose, plot holes, and terrible characterization. But guess what? You have all the pretty words in order, so that means it's a good book, right? Not even close. And if you're an author who thinks word choice is the end-all be-all to writing, I'm going to need you to come back down to reality and stop being an arrogant asshole with an ego the size of fucking Texas. And trust me, there are other readers and writers who think the same thing I do. I know a lot of them. When your prose is overly flowery, it can bog down an otherwise good plotted story. As with everything in writing, there should be a healthy medium. Like I said, I love pretty and poetic prose, I do. But I extremely dislike books written by authors who think word choice is the end-all be-all of good writing, when it isn't. As a reader, I'd take a book with meh prose, with an amazing plot and an amazing cast, than a book where I feel like the author is talking down to me with their writing. Or they're just talking in circles. Or, they just forget all about adding an actual plot to their book and solely focus on word choice and seeing how many unused words they can throw into the mix to make them look as smart as possible. It's gross and it ruins great books. But that's just my unwanted 2 cents. You don't have to agree with me, but what's your opinion? Comment below and let's talk.
Number 6.
Kind of gave my opinion already, but I will kind of note that I've never run into a book that has obnoxious prose, like over the top. The most I've really ever come into contact with is, like I mentioned before, where it just feels like the author probably did a thesaurus search, found like the most underused version of a word and most unique version, and they used that, or they learned a word and they're excited to use it, so they use it multiple times and it just doesn't fit with the rest of the book. I've never read a book where the prose are like over the top, mainly because I stay away from that genre. I'm not here to read. I'm not here to read poetry. Like, I think that kind of stuff deserves to be in poetry, and I think poetry is beautiful. But poetry is usually rather short because you don't want to read 60 to 100,000 words worth of poetry. Not in one go, anyways.
Is wordy writing. This kind of goes with the whole filler words things. So maybe use too many filler words like very, that, just. A lot of times you remove those words from your writing and the meaning of the sentence is exactly the same. Those are filler words because they don't really change the meaning of the sentence. Filler words often also encompasses things like adjectives and adverbs, so words that end in ly. A lot of times those words aren't really necessary. If you have wordy writing, maybe you don't struggle with filler words, maybe you just are very economical in the way that you write. Maybe it takes you 3 sentences to convey something that can be told in 1 sentence. Or maybe you're just a long-winded person and your book is too long. And I'm looking at myself because my first completed manuscript was 200,000 words for a young adult fantasy. Most young adult fantasy novels should be somewhere around, was it 75, 80,000 to like 100,000 is kind of top range. So I was...
God. What? What? What did you do? That is unbelievable. 200K. And you had to scrap that down to 70-ish or something, probably. Or maybe even around 100. You had to cut around half of that. When I first wrote my book, I think I got it to about 130-ish, I remember, if I remember correctly, about 130. And then I went through edits, and it came out to about like mid 150s, and now it's back down to about 140. So same thing happened with my second book. My second book is, I think, currently in like the 160 range, but that's after it went from like 140 to 150, somewhere in that range, up to about like the high 160s, and now I have it back down to about 160, right at the mark there. So, and that's my fantasy books. My romance books, like, it's one of those things where you know what your genre is, right? Like am I wrong? Isn't she a plotter? Like, how do you get such inflated word counts if you're a plotter? Maybe she's not a plotter. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe she's a pantser, but I'm pretty sure that just about everyone, just about all of the main voices on Authortube are plotters. That just blows my mind to have that much of a disparity. Like, or are you gonna break it up? Did you cut all of that stuff, or did you say, hey, you know what? I could end it here and then have that be another book. Like, what are you doing? What have you done?
Like 100,000 words outside of the range for that age category and genre. So if you have wordy writing, you might just be an overwriter, in which case you gotta get some critique partners in there and edit back those words. Or maybe you're not very economical, and again, a critique partner could be like, hey, you spent 3 sentences describing them walking into the inn, as our example before, where you can just say that in 1 sentence. Or you just may need to do a search through your Word document or whatever word processor you use and search for things like very, just that.
Well, I have to throw myself under the bus here and say that I am really, really guilty of this one. I'm a huge overwriter, and if you haven't noticed, I'm long-winded as fuck. Surprise.
That's because she's a
Welcome
pantser.
to the party. But that's okay. I also see this in a lot of the manuscripts I edit. You see, writers tend to over-explain things to the reader, because we want to paint the perfect picture of what we see in our minds. And as I stated in one of the last points,
I feel like that, where we want to paint an exact picture, is a young author trap. Potentially like a perfectionist trap as well, but like, I had that as a young author where I wanted to describe the entire room, where I wanted to describe the exact nuances of the fight scene, right? I still do a lot of detail in my fight scenes, right? Because that's where I specialize. I understand the psychology, excuse me, I understand the psychology of a fight. Sometimes, if I'm like, hey, you know what? This don't matter. Kale killed him. The end. Kale killed him. Off page, you come in when Kale is like covered in blood. He's killed him, and they are dead. We didn't need to see it because we know it was going to happen, right? It was inevitable. He's going to kill him. They're dead now. Great. But other times, it's very important, in my mind, that I explain the fight scene. But I used to go like super hard, like left hand, right hand kind of stuff. And God, that's stupid. That is stupid. Because it doesn't matter if it's left hand, right hand, unless it actually really, really, really matters, right? Because I might be like, he got stabbed in his right hand because that's his predominant hand, right? He got stabbed in his right hand, and then basically, or I could still technically even say he got stabbed in his hand, then he had to use his weaker hand to fight with his sword now, right? Kind of thing, whatever. I could still not specifically say which hand it is, but obviously I can easily just say that he got hit in his right hand. He had to use his weaker hand now to, use his sword. And that's important because now that will make it to where he's not fighting at his 100% best, right? He's having to use his weak hand. Blah, 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 blah. But I think a lot of times in fight scenes that I read, when it's a more experienced author, they are very clear. They're very clearly not doing like all the super detail, right? They're doing like just what needs to be done. Like, what do you need to know? He slashed with a sword. Well, was it horizontal or vertical? Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. He didn't land, right? We just say he slashed with a sword and he missed. The end. It doesn't matter if it was up or down. So I think that going into too much detail is a trap that a lot of newer writers fall into, and that a lot of maybe I don't know if this is really true or not for more perfectionists or something like that. But I feel like it's, with what I've seen, it's clearly newer writers, because there's a lot of other mistakes going on where it's like, okay, this is like your first time doing this then. And again, I made the mistake when I was new, so I think it's a mistake of a newer writer.
Sometimes like to explain every single detail there is when describing things, because we need to show the reader exactly how we see things. But I'm here to tell you, you don't have to. So please stop it. Now, I admit that this is totally easier said than done. I mean, I have done this myself. How I personally deal with this is that I write the first draft however the hell I want to write it, just to get everything down on paper. Then when I go back over it, I cut at least 30% and ask myself in every scene if it's absolutely needed, or, trying to be the realist here, does it slow the pace of the story down? Or does it push the story forward? Am I repeating myself by saying something I already described earlier in the chapter or the book? It's all about tightening up the prose and being honest with yourself of what's really needed for the reader and what's actually just wanted to be added by you, the writer. And like Meg said, if you get some really awesome CPs, they can help you find these crutch words and other areas to just be mindful about. Just don't expect...
Yeah, 100%. Your critique partners should definitely be helping you with this kind of stuff. And you should be spotting it out for them too. I think that I've mentioned this before with her, where she basically gives some advice that all revolves around getting it onto the page the first time. And I do agree with doing whatever it takes to get that first rough draft done, like get it on the page, right? However, like she said, she has to go back through and cut a bunch of things, because she's like, does this slow it down? Does this really help at all? I think that over time, especially after having to go through those edits, having to suffer through like, oh my God, why did I write this? I didn't need this. Why did I do this? After suffering through those edits, you're going to start not doing that. You're going to basically, your rough drafts will become cleaner and cleaner as you continue to write. Which is part of the reason why I say, like, anytime that you write, it's always going to be helpful, because it helps you, basically it helps you write. Anytime that you write, even if it's one of those times where you don't really feel like it, I don't really feel like writing right now, it's still going to help you in the long run, because even if what you write doesn't get put into a book, at the very least, it's going to improve your process down the road.
Them to be your editor, because they aren't your editor. I repeat, they are not your editor. They're just there to give you honest, constructive feedback.
Number 7, assuming your book is the next bestseller. So many newbie writers, especially when they're querying, claim to be the next J.K. Rowling. First of all, humility, people. We want to be humble and professional when we're querying literary agents, because we want to be conveying ourselves as professionals, people that are good to work with. And I would say just focus less on what other writers are doing and focus more on your own writing and how it can be improved. What I have seen, and I mean like 99% of the time, the writers who make these bold claims of being like the next J.K. Rowling or the next Stephen King usually needed the most help with their writing. I think there's a level of blindness to the flaws in our own work when you first start writing. When you first start writing, maybe you have parents that say, oh my gosh, you're wonderful. And maybe you don't have supportive parents. Maybe at school in your English class, you were the best writer. But that doesn't mean that your essay writing is going to convey to book writing. It's a skill that you need to practice. And book writing, you really can't be taught. You have to figure out how you as a writer write books.
This is where writers need a harsh reality check. And I'm completely 100% serious here. There are so many authors in the community as a whole thinking they're the next best hit. They do absolutely everything perfectly. Their ideas are 100% original, and they and their book are the exception to every writing rule out there. And do you know what I do? I end up reading their books only to find out that their quote-unquote 100% original idea is a complete and utter ripoff of like 3 to 4 different TV shows, books, or movies. And their big climax twist that was, supposed to be shocking was revealed in chapter 1 or 2 in the most glaring of ways.
Let's talk about ego. When it comes to confidence and ego, I think people are too far in a pendulum swing these days where they're like, you need to remove the ego. And I don't believe that. I think that you need to tone down your ego. You need to put your ego in check, right? But to remove it completely is to open yourself up for dismemberment, basically. So imagine this. 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, you are at war with another nation and you're keeping your ego in check because you're a good person who doesn't have an ego, okay? If most of the people in your nation are also doing the same thing where they're keeping their ego in check and they don't think that they're the best, like they're being honest, they're like, well, the Romans are pretty tough, so I mean, we can, we can't really win, but we do pretty good. Like we're good over here, and I'm sure the Romans will just leave us alone. If you don't have an ego that like, okay, Rome, fuck around and find out, right? Then you're gonna get demolished. Now, yeah, you might get demolished anyways, right? The enemy might be way stronger than you, but at least you might have a chance if your entire nation is like, try it and find out. Trust me, you don't want to try it. Because if you attack us, you're going to lose a lot of people. You might win. Maybe you'll win. But guess what? You're going to die doing it. That is the ego check that we really need. That is like the level that you need to have when you're writing your book. You need to say, you know what? I am better than a lot of these authors. I am. I can write a superior story. I can write a superior book than a lot of these other authors. You need to have that confidence. Because what's the point of you writing, taking all this time writing, if you don't think that you can have a good, or better yet, superior product? Now, yeah, maybe check the ego and don't say, I can write better than Tolkien, or I can write better than Sanderson, right? That's probably incorrect. Okay, you're probably not on that level, and I don't know other names, so I apologize. I can't give other Stephen King. I guess there's another genre name. Yeah. Don't say that you're the next so and so. Be the first you, first off, right? Be the first you rather than the next so and so. But rather than take on the head, just take out most of the body. Okay? You don't, in this world nowadays, you don't need to be the head. sitting on the shoulders is perfectly fine. You have a perfectly good view. Okay. So don't worry about, hyping yourself up that much. Just hype yourself up enough to where you say, you know what I'm doing has value. What I'm doing is worth it. And that's where you kind of need to be at. Hey, Ross.
I'm looking at
We got an ad coming.
We're in a bit of a predicament.
The man was killed. Please take that we did it.
Pretty Dead Queens by Alexa Dunn. I called it. Chapter 1. The grandma was the killer, and Ben, the love interest, was the other killer. Surprise! Not really, because if you read any of her books, you'd come to that conclusion from chapter 1 too. And their original characters are the epitome of stock characters and are walking and talking cliches. Look, I'm not saying this to be a bitch. I'm probably guilty of this shit too. I am not the exception to any writing rule, just like you, the viewer, aren't either. But I'm personally over writers not being humble enough to even consider thinking they are not the exception to all the writing rules. I'm not a perfect writer, like I said, neither is Meg or any other writer watching this right now. We all excel in different areas.
Yeah, being the exception to a rule, any writer who thinks that they are the exception is either high or stupid. It's one of the two. You can't think that you are the exception to the rule. Maybe you are writing a particular scene where in that very unusual circumstance it goes outside of the normal rules for writing. Sure, maybe. Probably not, but maybe. Okay? But you yourself are not the exception to the rule. If anyone ever thinks that is where you have too much ego.
And we need to work on other areas, and that is perfectly okay. There is nothing wrong with admitting where you fail to do something correctly. I don't understand this underlying rule in the Authortube community where, like, you're not allowed to admit where you fuck up in your own writing, or that's seen as, like, unprofessional or something. I don't get it. It's really...
Well, it just comes off as, like... Most of these people in the Authortube are people who are trying to give advice, and if you are called out for not following the advice, if you're called out for, bad writing, then it kind of goes into like, well, what right do you have to sit here and tell us how to write? So they can't admit their mistakes if they have them, because otherwise, they're going to be looked down on. I do think that what Kathrine here is talking about is like their current writing, which is like a death sentence. You can't be like, yeah, in my new book coming out and next month, there's tons of mistakes. So yeah, they can't do that. But for like previous works where you're like, hey, you know what? Hindsight's 2020. And now I realize I kind of messed this up or that up, but I've learned and we're going to keep going, right? That's fine. But it does look really bad if someone could go, hey, wait a minute. I have a video of you here from 2015, and your first book didn't hit until late 2016, where you go completely against your advice in 2015. So what happened? This isn't a learning experience. This is like something you technically said that you already knew, and now you're acting, and now you didn't follow your own advice. So what's up, right? Rosia, no, I did. I said I like watching these videos. Yeah, I like watching videos on writing. But as far as it goes for them having to own up to their mistakes, they're not going to own up to their mistakes probably until the book is like out to pasture kind of thing. Like this is no longer their, like I think that Jenna could talk about her mistakes with Eve the Awakening, because that book is like long gone, right? But to talk bad about her current series, which I think it's her current series, I don't know if I think I heard that she has another book in the works for her Saviors series. It's one of those things where that's still technically her income. So to be like, yeah, I've got all these problems in my current work, and I'm learning from them, that is a bad look. And especially, like we mentioned before, she comes across as a point of authority. She talks like this is the way you got to do it because this is how it's done. She comes across as a voice of authority, and that is her marketing, right? So to that would basically like be changing her branding, right? That'd be like changing her name. Her stance of authority is the same as her name at this point. So she can't do it.
Weird. Humble yourself, and people will be seeing you as more relatable.
Oh no.
But that's just my unwanted 2 cents. But cocky and overconfident writers are just asking to be ripped apart by readers like myself and even their peers. I know I brought up Jenna Moreci never admitting her pitfalls to the point of me thinking she's using this as some sort of marketing tactic. Or maybe she's just that unaware of her own writing flaws and just isn't.
I feel like you can publish a book as long as it doesn't interfere with a previous book/statement. Yeah, and that's kind of what I'm talking about. If you still do it, feel kind of fake, in my opinion, at least if you follow the author. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm saying is like, Jenna has a long history of being on YouTube. So there's all these videos where she's saying like, do it like this, don't do it like this. This is stupid. Like, you know, given the verbiage, right? Like the worst way to do it, right? The 10 worst ways to do this, the 10 worst ways to do that, the 10 best ways, the 10 best way, that kind of crap, right? She has all of these things. Having those there for us to just go back on and look and be like, well, wait a minute, you were saying right here, you literally made fun of doing this and then you did it. So why? Right? That makes it very difficult for her to backtrack or like kind of go back around. I think that she could probably just, if she just kept her voice of authority and was like, you know, do it this way, don't do it that way. If her opinion changes, then that's fine. You don't need to like, talk about the opinion changing. But she just needs to keep her voice of authority in order to keep her channel going. But and now she's releasing a book. I know that she is doing a book that is basically about how to write a book. So she's doing a nonfiction book. She can't discredit herself because otherwise that book will not sell well, right? She can't do it. It's one of those things where she just has to take the lumps. That's all she can really do. She just has to take the lumps and move on, kind of keep her head down. Don't focus on it too much and just keep going. That's all she can do. What I'm saying is just as a pleb, I have no idea of writing except writing except writing a story for Dungeons and Dragons campaign for about 2 years. Yeah, Dungeons and Dragons is much different, obviously, because you have to kind of account for, your players. I mean, I don't know if you can really see it very much, but I've got tons of little miniatures, right? But so yeah, I definitely understand like Dungeons and Dragons. It is still a writing form though, but it's just one of those things where it is different than writing a novel. It's a different, writing a short story, writing a poem, writing a novel, writing D&D. They are all writing, but they are different. They're different rule sets. They're different strengths and talents. So it's one of those things. Yeah, exactly. It's a certain rule set, but you can make everything else up. Yeah. It's just one of those things that with Jenna, she's just basically painted herself into a corner. It's okay. It's not that big of a deal, but it is what it is.
humble enough to publicly admit anything,
Yeah.
which leads more readers
She can't
to look at
publicly
her
admit.
works more critically. Because, I mean, on her channel, she acts like she is the end-all, be-all to all writerly advice, and if you don't do things her way, you're going to suck as a writer, and your books are going to suck. But then you
I think
read
she
her
takes
books
this,
and
like,
you
really
realize she
personally.
doesn't take 80% of her own writing advice. So I'm
Mainly 'cause of
telling
that.
you, it's a marketing tactic. It has
Yeah.
to be. Or at
100%
least reading
it's
all of
marketing.
her books have opened my eyes to all of her writing advice and how she doesn't follow most of it. When authors think their book...
I also think that when it comes to a person like Jenna, or a person like the iWriterly girl, or Alexa Dunn, anyone on here that gives out a lot of writing advice, especially when it's like top 10 lists, that's basically them just doing some research real fast, or not even real fast. Maybe they took the entire week, because they usually put out videos like once a week kind of thing, right? So they do these videos once a week. They do some research throughout the week. They find a top 10 list. They kind of think about it a little bit, and then they write the script, and then they do it in front of the camera. That doesn't mean that they have like a grasp on the concepts that they're really talking about. She might completely 100% agree with the things that she's saying. Like, you don't want to do this, you do want to do that. But she might not have a full grasp on it yet because she's never really done it. She's written 3 books. If you really think about it, that's a lot of writing, but it's also not a lot of writing. You know, she's not in Stephen King territory by a long shot. She's not, you know, like, we got, most of my series are like 14 books. Most of them are 14 book series. You got the Harry Potter one here that's only 7. But like, a lot of the books that I have are very large series that go past 5 books. And a lot of those authors probably wrote a number of books before they got to do those. Jenna is self-published, so she didn't have to go through the publishing wheelhouse and get turned down, get told no, write all these different books over the years that didn't actually ever see the light of day. So many books, so many authors that we see their grand masterpiece, we didn't see their trash, right? But unfortunately for Jenna, because she's able to self-publish, we're seeing her trash.
Will be the next bestseller. They are setting themselves up for disappointment. Yes, you can have all the hopes and dreams of one day striking it big like Stephen King, but those authors are so fucking rare. So have the goals in mind, but stay realistic so you don't
obviously
set
feel
yourself up for
pretty uncomfortable
disappointment.
too, especially to your people. You know, like, that's the thing that hurts the most, I think. Like, and this is kind of the reason that I stopped watching her to a certain degree. I kind of stopped watching Jenna to begin with because I feel like a lot of her advice is for beginners. But I really stopped watching her because I was like, okay, I'm hearing all like the worst reviews for her books. So I'm like, okay, so she doesn't really know what she's talking about. She has some understanding. I don't think she's stupid by any means, but she doesn't really know what she's talking about. She's a better marketer than she is an author. And it would probably feel pretty bad to have to admit that in a way you lied to your audience. Your audience are people who you interact with daily, who really just like love everything that you do. They love watching your video. They wait for your video to come out. Like, they're super hyped for it, right? She's got Patreon people who, pay her money monthly to be a part of, like, monthly group sessions and things like that. So she has this community that it would really hurt to have to be like, hey guys, look, I'm really sorry, but that book that I sold you was trash. Eee. What I hate about myself is that I love to do everything, but I'm not an expert at anything. Yeah, that is I think that's a big problem that comes across with a lot of our generations nowadays, is that we have so many options available to us from a young age that we have a hard time narrowing down and just going in. So yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where like you either, and the thing too is like, it always feels too late. It always feels like, man, if only I had done it, back when I was 15, and then you're 25, and it's like, man, if I only did it when I was 20, man, if I only did it when I was 25, when I was 30, right? It just keeps going up and up and up, where you think back and, man, if only I had changed. So it's one of those things where you just got to change at some point and tough it out. Ugh.
And if you happen to make it big, then it'll be a huge, nice surprise. Or at least that's how I handle things.
Love to write a book, but never consider myself a story writer. Why is that? Because I've heard people say, like, if you write your first draft, then technically you're an author. Even if you're not published, you are an author. And I feel like that is a little bit of a platitude to a certain degree. Like, you're an author. You're not a published author, but you are an author. And it's like, yeah, kind of. But as far as a story writer, I think that technically you are a story writer. You mentioned that you do D&D. You're a story writer. You wrote that down. You had to come up with a world. You had to come up with characters. That, to me, that is story writing. So I would say that just doing D&D, you're already a story writer.
I'm a realist. I try to see things for what they actually are. I don't think in dreams and wishes, but that's just how I deal with it. Check your author egos and be realistic in your dreams and goals. It'll save you a lot of disappointment in the future. And I know that's kind of like sad and depressing or whatever. But again, would you rather set yourself up for failure or set yourself up for surprised success? I'd take the latter.
Number 8, the POVs aren't handled well. POV usually refers to point of view of the person narrating a given chapter. So if you write adult fantasy, a lot of times there's a bunch of POVs, so maybe you have 6 different characters and they each narrate a different chapter. I'm thinking like Game of Thrones. They have a zillion POVs. Most of the time, literary agents and industry pros recommend that newbie writers do not write multi-POV.
Okay, let me get into that here in a second. As far as your request, yeah, I'm going to stay here in the chat. When it comes to multi-POV, it really just comes down to like whether your story needs it or not. So often I see people switch POVs in like in the works that they send me. It's like, what am I gaining from looking through person A's eye versus looking through person B's eye, right? Like, what's the real difference here? Sometimes it's obvious, right? No one that we've already met before is in this other location that this new character's in. Clearly that makes sense, right? But if you're in a location and you have like person A and person B, you've already introduced us through person A's eye. What's the point of going through and viewpointing person B? Why do I need to be more attached to them, basically, as well? Because anytime that you do a POV on a person, you are attaching us to that person more, right? Why not continue to build the attachment to person A? What's the real point here, right? So I do see people misusing POVs, and I think it might be because either one, they want to just emulate these other authors who have a ton of POVs, or B, they know that they're going to eventually use person B. Like person A and person B will eventually split off from each other. So person B will have their own storyline. So I want to get the reader used to person B at some point. But it's like, well, do we need to have person B's point of view at all until they split off? Do we really need it? If the answer is no, then just stay with person A and build him. We can still grow attached to person B through person A. There's nothing wrong with that. Then when we split and we get person B at that point, then it's like, oh man, okay, yeah, cool. I like this character. Yeah, let's see what he does. for the D&D campaign, if I theoretically turn that into a book, how would I be able to, if my players have like 50 pages of notes more than me as a DM? Yeah, that's for real. So I've run, as you can see, I got a ton of like little characters back here. I've run a lot of D&D. It's fun, right? D&D is fun. And the thing about it is that D&D does not mesh with the world that I made. So I made my world before I got into D&D, okay? So my world and D&D is not a perfect fit. Like basically the magic system's not a perfect fit, okay? So what I do when I'm playing D&D, if I really wanted to take one of my adventures and turn it into a book, let's say, what I would do with that is I would allow for inconsistencies from the book and the table, right? Again, because these are two different stories, kind of think of it like you're taking a short story and making it into a novel, or taking a novel and making it into a short story. There's going to be some inconsistencies because I need to adapt this, especially like to film, right? You take a book to film, there's wild inconsistencies there, right? So you have what you have on the table happen, and that's fine. But when you take it into a book, you might need things to happen a little differently because, you know what, for the sake of brevity, I need these two events to become one event. Otherwise, it takes too long, right? Or I need, for the sake of like less confusion or whatever, the party actually split at this point on the table, but this party never really did anything. So I'm just not going to have them split. I'm just going to have them stay here, right? And that might mean that I have to rewrite the encounter that like Team A had while Team B went off and did nothing pretty much. Team A had an encounter. I might need to rework that encounter because now I have Team B with Team A. Everyone's there kind of thing, right? So I would have to rewrite that. But that's just kind of what you have to do is you have to adapt what happened on the table to the best way of the story. Let's see here. Made my world, and there's something happening that doesn't appear in the world. I'll make it up. I have like 70% custom rules and 30% base rules. Yeah. A lot of D&D is very customized. But yeah, when you're taking what you have on the table and you're putting it into a book, which I find I have read a few books that were like, someone said like they were either inspired or they were D&D. Those are very interesting books sometimes because if you know that going in, a lot of times you might say to yourself, oh man, that means that like during fight scenes, it is possible that anyone could die because it was up to dice rolls. It's not up to the author to keep people alive or to let them or to have them die. It's up to the dice at that point, right? So that is kind of fun to read that. But I would say, and I say this all the time in my writing videos, when you're writing, everything needs to serve the plot, right? You want to have the best story possible. Everything that you're doing needs to serve the plot. So if you're adapting what you had on the table into a story, yeah, you're going to keep a lot of it the exact same, but there are going to be some differences. You're going to clean up dialogue, for instance, right? I mean, like, you might not have it written down what your players said at the table. Maybe you have it recorded and you can actually have the exact dialogue. You probably won't. For the sake of cleaning up and making it shorter on the page, making it snappier, punchier kind of stuff, right? You're going to clean that dialogue up. You're not going to have the party sit there going like, well, what should we do, guys? Should we go in there? What should we, like that, the whole round of debating whether they should go through the door or not kind of thing. It's one of those things where, it's still a creative process. You're still going to have to figure it out. You're still going to have to put some effort and some work into it to make it fit from the table into this book. Yeah, you're studying to become a teacher for English, and yeah, that's the thing, is you have to manage your time. So I mean, if it's not that important to you, don't write a book. You know, I would say to have a hobby. It sounds like your hobby's probably D&D though, so you probably don't need the extra workload or hobby of writing a book.
If you do write multi-POV, most recommend less than 6, and ideally even fewer than that. I would say like no more than 2 to 3. And so what do I mean by POVs weren't handled very well? Well, maybe there isn't a clear distinction of when one person's POV starts and stops versus the next one begins. And a lot of writers start POVs at the start of the chapter, so chapter 2 is this character, chapter 3 is this character. But maybe you do mid-chapter swaps, and there isn't a clear scene break. Or maybe you head hop, and that's very confusing. Gives me whiplash, and personally, as a reader, I strongly dislike head hopping. I like the clear, distinct break between chapters, personally, but again, that's just my personal preference.
As a reader, I dislike head hopping. That seems like a statement that shouldn't be like a as a reader, I don't like it. No one should like it. It's head hopping. It's confusing. No matter who you are, it's bad.
Another way that you might be botching up the POVs is there's not a distinct voice between the two. So if you're writing a third-person limited POV, for example, which is the most popular, I would say, for multi-POV books, you have to have distinct voices between your characters. Sally on chapter 1 and Jim on chapter 2 and Sarah on chapter 3, they all have to have different distinct voices because they're 3 different people. If they don't have distinct voices and they all sound the same, that's an issue.
Once again, I have to agree with Meg here.
Yeah,
I love me a good multi-POV story, but holy hell have I read some terrible multi-POV books that were traditionally published, no less. I bring to you The Fifth Wave. This is the first book that came to mind while listening to Meg explain this one. In The Fifth Wave, it's a multi-POV story, but it's done terribly, terribly wrong, in my opinion. All of the characters' POVs read like the same person was speaking. Yeah. None of the characters, even though it was first person, had a unique voice. It was so bad that I lost track of whose POV was occurring in said chapter.
First off, I think that this can happen a lot when you basically are first person POVing. That's usually why fantasy is in third person, is because that way, even if you change POV, you're still using their name rather than I, because I mean, I could be anybody, right? So yeah, that's why most of that is going to be in first person, or excuse me, in third person. When it comes to having like just a similar voice stretched across multiple POVs, that usually comes from one of two things, in my opinion. That's either going to be you don't really know what their motivation is besides like being good. Like you have a general idea of them. Maybe you know what they want, but you don't know their core values. You don't know what makes them who they are, right? You just know like this person's a good person and they want to find the hidden dagger. That's all they're doing. That's all they're doing this entire book. That is not unique enough to really build a character off of, right? So that's going to be number one. The most common reason why people will have like the same voice is because they're just like, this person is relatively smart, they're good, and they have this motivation. The next character, who might be opposed to that first character because they want to get the dagger too, but they're also relatively smart and they're also a good person. Sounds like the same person, right? And then they might have a different person who's like, oh, this person's kind of stupid though. So now you get a little bit different voice because this person sounds a little dumb. But otherwise, they're still a good person and they still want to get that dagger. But they're a little dumb. So if you have characters that all have like those same generalities, and you're just kind of like trying to think of like, well, what would they do in this situation? Well, they're generally smart and they're good. They're going to do this, that, the other thing. That doesn't help. You have to know what their core values are. The second way that this can come up is if your writing style is just very bland. Like it's very much like, you know, the mud was on my shoes. The mud covered my shoes. That's kind of like your writing style. You don't really describe the mud. You don't really, basically that. You don't really describe the mud. You don't really describe how it got on your shoe. You just say like the mud covered my shoe, right? Or the mud covered Tom's shoe. If your writing style is very bland to where you can't distinct like what a character would be paying attention to, or the types of like metaphors that they would come up with. So basically, like in one of my books, one of the main characters is trained in blacksmithing. So he a lot of times uses like the forge, or he uses anvils, or he uses hammer strikes. He uses those kind of metaphors for things. While another character, she loves to cook. That's like one of her favorite pastimes. She doesn't get to do it very often, but she loves doing it. And so she thinks a lot in ingredients, the way that things taste, the way that things combine together to make better things, right? She thinks a lot in cooking terminology, right? So even if I wasn't clear on who's talking, if I wasn't using that person's name, just the fact that I'm using metaphors that are for, you know, either cooking or for forging weapons, you know whose POV you're in because of those metaphors. But a lot of times when I read people who do POV swaps, they don't use metaphors. They just use straight like, yeah, the mud covered their shoe. The end.
Chapter. I did my best to read the second book, and when I saw the same exact issue there, I DNF'd it. I was like, I'm not dealing with this. This is exactly what writers don't want their readers to do. Writers need to be careful when dealing with multiple POVs. I'm planning to do a few videos on the different points of view there are and ways to make them work and things to avoid, so be on the lookout.
I will definitely look out for that. Unlike this.
Welcome to my home, where your meat...
For those videos, I don't know, they may be up already, they may not. It all depends on when this video goes live, because I batch film. The key detail that I want to stress here is this.
I batch film
Each
too.
character needs to have their own unique voice, or it will all fall apart and just confuse the hell out of the reader. And the best example that I can give to you is The Fifth Wave. Go check it out to maybe understand what I'm talking about. Maybe you see it the same way I did, maybe not. Comment below if you've read it before.
Number 9 is writing a story that...
Weird when people are like, this book was trash. Go check it out. See if you hate it too. It's like, no, I don't want to read it. It sucks. If you think it sucks, I'm probably going to think it sucks. I don't really care to waste my time and my money.
Stakes or conflict. Stories are made of conflict. Without conflict, there is no story. This is especially true for plot-driven stories. Conflict supplies the stakes and odds, which leads to the rising and falling action, which is a critical part of the structure of most books. And the 3-act plot structure is probably the most popular example of a structure for books, but there's many different ways you can structure a novel. The 3-act plot structure is just one of those. In addition, without conflict, characters can't grow and change throughout the story, which is really crucial in character-driven stories.
I agree with Meg here on this one. I know, I'm agreeing a lot with her. A book without stakes and conflict is a very boring read and can lead to flat characters with little to no change. As a reader, I love character-driven stories.
One of the things I'll say is a lot of times, especially obviously in fantasy, it feels like people don't understand that conflict doesn't have to be violence. We're so used to watching, movies and TV, and a lot of that stuff comes from books. A lot of that stuff is book adaptations. And the conflict doesn't have to come from the violence. The violence can definitely fill in sometimes, right? That can be some exciting, flashy things. But the real conflict that people really latch onto is always interpersonal. I mean, look at what TV does. Gigantic numbers is always going to be where you put people in a house, lock them in there, and see what they do, right? That's always big TV. It's just to see how people deal with each other.
Stories. That's why I always say your characters can make or break your book. And as a writer, I tend to write more character-driven stories as well. I love human behavior, and every character is a blank page, and you, as the author, gets to craft each character into something amazing and memorable. Or maybe they'll just be flat and terrible, and readers won't like them at all. There's a fine line between good characters and bad characters. Maybe that's what I'm getting at here. And adding conflict forces your character to change and grow over the course of the entire story. So remember that when writing.
Yeah, one thing I'll note onto that is, kind of like I was mentioning before, needing to know your character's core values, because those are the things that they're going to fight for, right? If it's not a core value, they're not really going to care about it. They might have an opinion, right? They might have an opinion on whatever the subject is, but if it's not attached to their core value, they are not going to head into conflict for it, right? Like the old saying of like, this is not the hill to die on, or are you going to die on that hill kind of thing, right? That's one of those things is like, we want to see like the big conflict too. We don't want to just see like any conflict. That's not that big of a deal. We want to see the biggest conflict that character is going to be able to go into. And so it has to be something that is attached to their core values. If it's not that important. So knowing what their core values are means that now we know what they're going to fight for. So we can instigate that conflict. But it also means that we'll be able to change those core values, right? If that person is going through their character arc, that core value that's being tested either needs to change to where it becomes a different core value, or it needs to basically like harden and find its resolve. Like they were tested and they still believe what they believed before, but now they have like, a newfound respect for it kind of thing. They have a deeper understanding of it. That is also one thing I think that a lot of books don't explore. They want to see, and this isn't bad. They want to see the core value change, right? Rather than it deepen. They just want to see it change. I think that it's surface level in a way. I mean, we're dealing with core values here, so that is very deep. But if all you ever do is take a character and just continuously change their core value or core values over and over again, then that character is just a wishy-washy piece of trash, right? I think that sometimes your character needs to hold on to one of their core values and be rewarded for their resolve.
Your book.
Number 10, too little or too much description. On one end of the spectrum is the too little description, which are things like the floating heads. So you have all these characters talking back and forth to each other, but the reader doesn't necessarily know where the story is taking place, who the characters are, what the conflict is, and why they should care. So you need to ground the reader in the scene. They need to know where things are happening, and they need to know who the characters are. On the opposite side of that is when you have info dumps. Info dumps is where we don't even know where the story is taking place, but you are just plopping on all the background information for your characters or for the world at large. There needs to be books. We need to have dialogue and action and scene and character building and setting. All those things need to happen, but you need to kind of collaboratively include those things in your writing. You can't do just the setting and then just the dialogue and then just the description. You need to kind of blend those things smoothly together.
Oh boy, I'm about to bring up the cyborg tinkerer yet again. I think Meg's book sometimes had too little description, and in other places it had too much. The same can be said for The Savior's Champion by Jenna Moreci and The Ivies by Alexa Dunn. Come to think of it, a lot of Authortuber books either lack description or they have just way too much that bogs the story down. And they just info dump the fuck out of the reader. As with everything in writing, there needs to be balance. If you lack description, readers may not have a clear understanding of what the world looks like in the books The Savior's Champion and The Cyborg Tinkerer. As for the Ivies, I think there were areas of too much detail.
All right. Bravo, I apologize. I'm sorry, man. I don't do reactions to songs. I hope it's good though, man. I hope you get some good feedback on it. But I'm not one to do feedback on songs, but as far as this goes here with like the overwriting or underwriting, I think it's one of those things where it's hard to find that medium, and it also comes along with people having to understand when to use telling. Because we always hear the advice of like, show, don't tell, and that's almost 100% true. There's very, very few times where you would prefer to tell over showing, and it's very hard to like find that and to understand when that is. But I also just think that, you know, it always comes back to the advice of, does the reader really need to know this? Whatever this is, whether it be like what's in a room, or, you know, what the person looks like, does the reader need to know this thing about them? Okay, if the answer is yes, put it in. If the answer is no, probably leave it out then.
In areas of too little when it comes to character descriptions, but we sure did get a play-by-play breakdown of Avery's bedroom. That I remember in great detail. As for the cyborg tinkerer, I didn't feel...
Now, I will note for like bedroom, not really just bedrooms, but just like rooms that mean a lot to a character, I think that it is in those cases when it's like they live in this room, they're going to, and also too, that means this also should be where you have a lot of scenes happening. I think that those can take on more definition. Those can take on more description than other scenes, than other locations, because you are showing the reader the room, but you're also showing them the character. You're showing them what the character really cares about, because obviously you still don't want to go too far, but you know, it's a good tool to use to be able to describe and to be able to get your reader closer to your character by showing them the character's bedroom, let's say, and going around and picking a few things that really help define your character. Again, don't go overboard with this. This shouldn't be a page long kind of thing, but it can be used as a creative tool to, rather than just be like, you know, here's the room, you know, layout looks like this and blah, blah, blah. It can be a vehicle for character development while also setting a scene that hopefully you use a number of times, since you put so much effort into it.
Like the reader got enough descriptions for the ship and the city she was in. As for the Savior's Champion, there was pretty much no world building at all and scenery description. But if I remember right, Jenna did do a pretty good job in Eve the Awakening with all the descriptions, even if they were 100% stereotypical. It was better than the Savior's
Jenna
Champion.
A compliment? Oh my god.
Number 11 is mimicking a writing style from a different time. This kind of goes along with point number 1. So writers are often readers. We should be reading a lot to learn how the greats are creating novels and how we can improve our own writing. Just kind of a foundation level. Now, if a writer is reading something like Lord of the Rings, which was published in, the 30s, versus something like Nevernight, a book I praise all the time on this channel, they're very different writing styles. One was written again for the 30s, and one was written for, now. I think Nevernight was published in 2016. Either way, even reading something like Robert Jordan's The Wheel of Time series, one of my all-time favorite series, that was written in the 90s. The writing style is very different from today's writing style. So be very mindful that you are reading books that are published recently, because the modern-day reader is different than the reader of 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. They're
fucking stupid. That's what she means by that. Like, I've mentioned this before. I might even mention it in this freaking video. I don't know. But, like, when I read Lord of the Rings, I was a kid, and I had to get up and go get a dictionary. After getting up and going to the living room 3 times to pick up that dictionary, I just took it back to my bedroom. Because I was like, it looks like I'm going to need this thing, right? So I don't think that the answer is making our work just like overly accessible to everyone. There are different levels of reading comprehension, and that's like what we test for in school, right? Like I was in I want to say like 5th grade, and I tested out of all English from then on. I didn't have to take English ever again because I was on a college level for English. I had to, well, actually, that's not true. I didn't have to take reading because my reading comprehension was college level. My spelling was trash, so that I had to go to English classes for still. But I didn't have to take reading classes because my reading comprehension was far and away above how old I was. That being said, though, certain books are written towards younger audiences, and certain books are written towards, older audiences, right? And I am of the belief that, hey, look, I'm writing for adults, therefore I'm not going to sugarcoat the writing for you, right? Just like I'm not going to sugarcoat the content, right? If I'm going to read writing about, child sacrifice, murder, backstab, all these things, right? All these adult things, right? Why would I also like make the writing accessible to like an 8th grader? You know what I mean? Like, is my writing on the level of Tolkien's as far as like vocabulary? Fuck no. Of course not, right? No, of course it's not. But I don't dumb down my work to cater to readers of today. I would rather my readers be challenged a little bit in reading my work than basically me making it super easy for them to just breeze through and not really have an engaging experience, I guess you could say. I personally don't think that my writing is overly difficult by any means, but I do look at Tolkien, and I do look at Jordanson, and I do look at Sanderson, and I look at a lot of different time periods, and I take from them all. I don't go, oh, I don't want to, that's the 90s version. I don't want to do that, right? It's just one of those things where I don't agree with that take on, like, understand that you have a different audience because they're stupid. I'm sure that she would be like, that's not what I meant. She probably doesn't really mean that, but really that's what she means, even if she doesn't know it. Because what do you mean by you're writing for a different audience today? You mean that they can't handle that level of English is what you really mean. So therefore, you really do mean that they're stupid, or at least dumber than they used to be.
Not the same, and you want to write for an audience that would enjoy your book.
Now, this is where I get to piss off even more people and say I don't agree with Meg on this one at all. Well, okay, not completely, actually.
I'm pissed now.
Now, hear me out. Like I said in one of the last points, I love poetic prose, and where do we typically find this kind of prose? Yep, in older books, when prose was good. Now, what is the quality of a lot of prose like today? It's overly simplistic, watered down, and if I'm being very honest and harsh, it's dumbed down for the reader. Hey. I read a novel like The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson, and the prose is so fucking beautiful. Or I could read a book like Anne Rice's Claiming Beauty series, and again can say the prose is so fucking beautiful. In both of those examples...
Your prose are not beautiful.
Welcome to my home, where your meat...
No.
Examples, the prose is poetic and flows perfectly, and it doesn't feel dumbed down to the reader. Then we flash forward to today's standards of writing, and we get overly simplistic prose and shallow nothing.
Yeah. I think that this is something that I do where I do have more straightforward prose. I do write in a more... Because I personally am very like analog, so I do write in a way that is very, I'm just telling you what it is. I'm just the cold, slimy mud sank into his shirt, right? I'm probably not going to give some sort of deep metaphor on top of that kind of thing, right? I'm just telling you there's this mud, it's cold, it's slick or whatever I just said, and it went into his shirt. There you go. Now you know, right? I still want to engage the senses, and I think this is something that I'm failing on. I think that I probably really, if I really think about it, I am failing on this, where I'm not engaging the mind. I'm engaging the senses. I'm engaging the imagination, which is engaging the mind, but I'm not engaging like the consciousness. I'm not engaging like thought process. I'm not. That's where my writing could really improve. Is making it to where it engages people's opinions. It engages their real thought process. That's probably where I could take my writing to another level. But that's very difficult. That's a challenge.
Feels like I'm reading something written by 6th graders and nowhere near adults or even high school level of writing. But what are your thoughts? Comment below and let's actually have a conversation about the differences in prose from the past and today's prose. I personally wish old-timey prose would like make a return, or at least in the horror genre. I can't speak for classic fantasy novels since I haven't read many classic fantasy novels. But as for Authortuber books, I've read a good number of them. A good example of actual good prose that I have to say, even though I give Jenna Moresi a bunch of shit about her writing advice and how she doesn't follow it, I do have to say the prose in The Savior's Champion, minus all the cunts and cocks and apologies, is what saved that book for me. It literally read like she spent time, put a lot of effort and energy into it. So the prose was pretty, in my opinion, and maybe it was a little too flowery in some areas, but it was the prose that saved that book for me. And then came The Savior's Sister. And I was just like, what the fuck is even that? Who wrote this book? Because it wasn't the same person who wrote The Savior's Champion. I know that much. It was terrible compared to The Savior's Champion. And as for Meg's book, The Cyborg Tinkerer read okay. But it also felt like she was trying to take some writing quirks from Jenna's books, if that makes sense. It wasn't the best or the worst.
One thing I'll say that kind of taps into this is like when you're reading people who are current and you're going to emulate them, be super careful about that. Be so careful about that, because even though you liked it, you know, it's one of those things where like you kind of look back at your childhood and you're like, man, I wore that? What was I thinking? Oh, God. Like, we look back at these styles that we thought were so good, right? Like these fashion senses that we thought were so good. We listened to this music we thought was so good back then, kind of thing. And now that we've had some time to distance ourselves from it, we look back and we're like, damn, that sucked, right? That's the kind of thing that I would say be wary about emulating current authors, because you might think like, oh man, this was so good. But give it 10 or 15 years and you're going to be like, that shit sucked. And oh fuck, I emulated it, right? You can look back at people like Tolkien, at Jordanson. You can look back at basically successful authors, right? You can look back at them and you can be like, you know, they were good, right? We look back and we say like, yeah, they were writing at that time, but they were good. That's why they've lasted, right? The other authors that came out at the same time, you know, or you know, Martinson, right? George R.R. Martinson. You look back at the same authors at that time, and only a few really continued to survive, while others are like, you know, one-hit wonders kind of thing, right? They didn't last. They had a couple books come out, then they were gone, right? But you look at the ones who were able to stick around for a long time, and you start to realize, yeah, That's why they're good. It's because of this, that, and that's why they could stick around. It's because of these traits, right? So really, really cautious on emulating current authors, because you don't know if they're it's hard to say that. Like, you don't know if they're actually good or not. You feel like they're good. You read them and you're like, man, this was great. I love this story. But give it 10 or 15 years and you'll be like, oh my gosh, that's absolutely, that's horrible. I can't believe I thought that was good at the time, right? It could just be, right, the current in fashion thing, right? So emulate the known greats. Emulate the people who we know are good. Someone that is like current that we know is good, at least in the fantasy world, would be someone like Brandon Sanderson. I think John Grisham, mystery and thriller, I think he still writes. Maybe he's retired now, I'm not sure. But you look at the people who are currently writing, there are some that you can be like, this is good. They've been around, they've established their name though. They've been around for like 20 years or more, right? But they've been around. The authors who've been around for like 5 years or so, it's probably going to be a good idea to not try to emulate them.
That I've read, but it wasn't anything that stood out from all the rest, if that makes sense. Then for Alexa Dunn, I've read all her books. The prose in Brightly Burning and the Stars We Steal was so much better than the Ivies and Pretty Dead Queens. And I mean so much better, to the point where it read like the Ivies and Pretty Dead Queens was just thrown together and rushed to print. And it's like she didn't self-edit it at all. And there was no care.
I was thinking that she was basically saying, like, look, you can improve. But I'm pretty sure Ivy's is the most recent thing that she's done.
Or concern. She probably just said, you're the editor. Deal with it. Read it more than me. And I'm not saying this to be a bitch. I'm just pointing out the obvious. I'm trying to give modern day examples here. And I've read a ton of Authortuber books. And let's face it, the majority of the books I've been reading for the past year or so has been mostly Authortuber books, and the quality difference is so noticeable. Now, people are probably going to be trying to interpret this as me saying that I think I'm somehow superior or better than other writers or Authortubers, but I want to make this 100% clear. I don't. I am not better than anyone out there. And no one is better than me. We all suck in our own ways, and we all prosper in our own ways, just like the next Authortuber, and I'm okay with that. I'm humble enough to say that I make mistakes in my own writing. It doesn't make me a failure. It just makes me honest. Also, you don't have to be like Jenna Moreci and lack any and all humility. You don't have to put yourself down all the time and basically tell people you think you suck as a writer. This goes for everyone listening to this right now. We all excel in different areas, and we need to work harder to improve in other areas, and that's perfectly fine.
Number 12 is a story that lacks a hook. Basically, what makes your story unique? Think about your elevator pitch. Can you summarize your book in one sentence? Let's see if I can do this for like Nevernight, because again, I praise this book all the time on my channel. Let me pull it out. This is Nevernight. Basically, it follows this character, Mia, who goes to an assassin school.
Can you do it? No.
And it's kind of like Harry Potter in that they're learning and they're taking classes, but if you don't do well in class, you die. That's a hook, in my opinion. That's how I would describe
That's how you would do it. Okay.
the hook of this book. So,
using commas. Using a lot of commas.
what is the hook of your book? What makes it unique? Are your characters just ambling about in the forest going on a random quest that really doesn't have any connections to anything or the end of the book? That's a problem. I feel like a distinct hook often indicates the writer knows the plot of their story. Think about if you can summarize your book in a single sentence. If you can't, that might indicate you
I guess it would be young monk enters the world and is split between the choice of two women who are at odds with each other.
have some editing to do.
Got some work to do on that.
I agree with Meg here. When I started reviewing books on my channel, I came upon a lot of books that couldn't hold my interest, like at all. but I forced myself to read them because I spent money on them. Now I allow a book 5 chapters to snag my interest, or I'm DNFing because my time is valuable, like everyone else's. Readers DNF books for plenty of different reasons. I can make a whole video on the topic of DNFing since I've DNF'd a lot of books on this channel. If anyone is interested in seeing a video like that, let me know in the comments. Most of the time, the reason I DNF a book is because there isn't a hook, or there isn't anything that really grabs my attention and makes me want to keep on reading.
One thing I'll also note about a hook, the hook really needs to include your inciting incident, right? So, like, the inciting incident for my book is when Kale, the main character, meets the 2 love interests. He meets them at different times, technically, yes, but he meets them basically one chapter after the other. That is typically, I want to say it's supposed to be like within 5 to 7% of your book. And that might be different depending on the genre. Some people say it needs to be before like page 20. Like if you get to page 20 and you don't have your inciting incident, then you've messed up. So yeah, I mean, basically kind of keep that in mind. Your inciting incident needs to happen pretty early on. And that way your character has that goal, has that struggle, has that conflict there for the reader to really invest in, right?
Without a hook, the book is DOA, and most readers will tap out, so do yourself a favor and make sure that...
So yeah, if you wait too long to give that inciting incident, if you are thinking like, you know what, I'll have like some world building chapters, and then the inciting incident will happen in chapter 15, like that's really where like the turning point is. No,
there is an enticing...
What ad is it?
Sweaty Betty, find your power.
Skip this. How dare you, Sweaty Betty? I'll never buy your stuff, Sweaty Betty.
Hook near the starting...
I'm saying that for the algorithm. I hope that they hear me.
Your story and keep the readers reading. As for bringing it back to Authortube books, I have to say the perfect book that brings no hook at all is The Ivies, or Pretty Dead Queens by Alexa Dunn. In both books, nothing really kicks off until about 5+ chapters into the story.
Given that those are like thrillers, I don't know about whatever she said. I don't even remember what the name of it is. I know that The Ivies is like a thriller. So that's probably 60 to 80,000 words, probably on the lower side, probably like 65 to 70, I'm guessing actually. So yeah, chapter 5 sounds like that's way too late.
In The Ivies, we get 5 chapters all about college admissions and info dumping the fuck out of the reader about college admissions and school life and politics. It's just dry and boring. And then in Pretty Dead Queens, the murder doesn't even take place until the 30% mark of the story. And that is a very slow crawl uphill to anything exciting. And there is no mystery to the story. I'm telling you, it feels like Alexa Dunn has just reused her characters in the past and even some of the same plots for the sake of selling books. And that's it. And it's starting to really show.
So in mine, Kale meets Tria in chapter 2. And then let me just double check. Is it chapter 3 or 4? chapter 4, he meets Melandre. So chapter 4 is kind of down in there. I'll be honest, that is kind of late, but given that he meets Tria in chapter 2, I think that's like early. Like it's like, hey guys, this is a romance, by the way, and then we complicate the romance by adding Melandre in, and now we've got a love arrow. So that's one of the things I'd mention is like you want to make sure that goal, that motivation, that tension, not even the motivation, because sometimes the character doesn't really know yet. Sometimes they feel the tension, but they don't really, they're trying to focus on other things, right? They're trying to focus on the lawsuit, or they're trying to focus on fixing their mom's house, but the tension of the love interest is there.
In her writing, for example, she's even said in a video, I can't remember which one, that in one of her first books, I can't remember if it was Brightly Burning or The Stars We Steal, she said her betas or CPs said, yeah, nothing happens in the first like quarter or third of the book. I think this is just an Alexa writing flaw, that she is not able to write a good, enticing hook for the beginning of her story, and nothing really happens. It's just the character meandering about, settings are set, and nothing exciting is happening. And I could tell you, because I read all 4 of her books.
I do think that, like if you follow like the hero's journey wheel, let me pull it up real fast. So up here is the known, right? You have the call to adventure, supernatural aid, threshold, guardians, whatever, blah, blah, blah. Or the guardians, threshold. And then beginning of the transformation, challenges and temptations. You have helpers and mentors. The very bottom is the revelation, their death and rebirth, transformation, atonement. And then the return is back to like the known now, right? Now that we know all of this stuff, that was the hero's journey, right? We go from the normal down into this wild, crazy shit, and then back. Now that we've done all this, now we have a new normal. And technically, it's a new known, but it is still that. This right here is, man, I forget the name of it now. But basically, this is like where they're just in their normal shit, right? Like their day to day, right? You get used. You show the reader like what they're used to, what their normal life is, right? This is where they live day to day. But you don't want this to last for so long. Remember, this right here is after all of this, we go back to the return. This is the resolution. The resolution is usually less than a chapter. Sometimes it's a full chapter. I've seen resolutions be wrapped up in like a paragraph, like super, super fast, right? The resolution should be very small. But sometimes resolutions stay too long, and you might get like a couple chapters of resolution. This is kind of like the Lord of the Rings at the end of the Return of the King, where we have an ending after ending after ending kind of thing, right? That was wrapping up an entire series, sure, but it did kind of feel like, oh my god, here we go again and again and again and again. That's kind of when you overstay that, right? But here it sounds like Alexa is getting caught up in staying in here too long and not moving past into the unknown.
Books. It usually doesn't pick up until 5+ chapters into the book. So it really makes you think, are you starting the story in the correct place? But that can be a video in and of itself.
Yeah. Okay.
Number 13, the book has no plot. This, again, kind of goes with our previous point in number 12, but what is the story about? What, if you're going on a quest? I feel like quest stories are kind of a trope. They're fun. Lord of the Rings, right? It's a quest. So what is bringing them from point A to point B? Where do the characters need to go? Who's the antagonist? What are the stakes? So the character, the protagonist, usually wants something, and they try for it, they don't get it. They try again, they fail again, and then there's like this gradual building of stakes to the end where they may or may not get that thing in the end, depending on if there's a happy ending and so on. But what does the character want? Who's the antagonist? Who are they up against? Every scene should move the characters closer to the resolution of your story. So you don't want just kind of scenes in the middle of the book that are just for funsies. There should be a purpose to the scene, and I think the best writers have multiple purposes to every single scene. So maybe we'll go with the quest scenario. The first quest, they are searching for the treasure map. I don't know. I like pirates. Let's do treasure map. So maybe they're looking for a treasure map. And while they're searching for a treasure map, two characters have a dialogue and they're starting to fall in love. In the dialogue, the one character has a realization, aha, that was the clue. And thus, that's where we need to go to get the map. And so, and that scene had a multi-purpose. You saw these two characters bonding, potentially falling in love, forming a romance for later on in the book. And then, aha, we know where to find this treasure map. Really weird example, but hopefully you guys get the idea. But no scene should just be because you like the scene and you want it in there. Every single scene should have a purpose that leads to the resolution of your story.
I have to agree 100% with Meg on this point. As an editor, I see a lot of meandering around and extra fluff and stuff, as I like to call it. Basically, there are scenes within the story that serve absolutely no purpose to the overall plot, thus bogging down the pace. But the writer feels it's important. They think it adds more backstory or descriptions or scenes to the
Yeah, that's the most common that I see, is where they think it's some sort of backstory that they need to plug in. They don't.
overall story that matter oh so much, but in reality, to the reader at least, it doesn't. And I'm guilty of doing this exact thing in my books as well. I think all writers do this because we tend to feel like everything is always important, when in reality, it's not always important. Every scene in a book needs to push the story forward. If there is a bunch of scenes where the character is going about their ordinary day, eating meals, getting ready, and traveling to the next scene, are they really that important? I don't think so. Unless someone is getting poisoned at mealtime, chances are it can be cut down and not be missed by the reader. Now, if Jenna Moresi were responding to this point, this would be the time where she throws a jab at pantsers, and I'd kind of have to agree with her here. I have nothing against pantsers. If that's your thing, then by all means, go for it. I'm an outliner myself. I need structure. I need to know where my story will go, or I'm going to just be a big meandering mess on the page. Since you're discovering the plot as you go, there is more risk to writing extra scenes that don't necessarily really matter to the overall plot of the story, and you don't end up cutting things down until you go back to self-edit and kind of see, okay, what is the basic plot of the story and what is needed and what needs to be cut. So when a writer has no detailed path to follow, random events just happen, and that's the harsh truth. It doesn't make the pantser any less of an author. It just means there's going to be more room for error while drafting and a lot more editing after you finish your manuscript. It's just how it is. So comment below and tell me what you think of Meg Latour's advice for newbie writer mistakes. Do you agree with her? Do you disagree? Do you agree with me or disagree? Everyone has an opinion, so what is yours? Comment below and let's have a civil discussion. Well, that's...
So, obviously I went through everything, but I'll just say that, you know, most of the stuff that she said is right. I don't think I disagree with her a whole lot. I kind of already forgot now. Andy. When it comes to this last one here.
Number 13, the book has no...
Oh yeah, no plot. Basically, if you're writing anything that is not to do with your plot, don't do it. You can write that for yourself to like know that they had this backstory or whatever, that this thing occurred. But if it's not currently relevant to the plot where you're at in the story, then